英語聞き流しリスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語はホームページからお聞きいただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com
Now quite reassured, but unable to believe in so great a miracle, he opened his eyes and at once began to shout with happiness and admiration. From all the open tombs came thousands of splendid flowers. They spread everywhere, on the paths, on the trees, on the grass, and they went up and up until it seemed that they would touch the sky. They were great full-blown roses, showing their hearts, wonderful golden hearts from which came the hot, bright rays which had wrapped Tyltal in that summer warmth. Round the roses, birds sang and bees buzzed gaily. "I can't believe it. It's not possible," said Tyltal. "What has become of the tombs and the stone crosses?" Dazzled and bewildered, the two children walked hand in hand through the graveyard, of which not a trace remained, for there was nothing but a wonderful garden on every side. They were as glad and happy as could be, after their terrible fright. They had thought that ugly skeletons would rise from the earth and run after them, pulling horrid faces. They had imagined all sorts of awful things. And now, in the presence of the truth, they saw that all that they had been told was a great big story and that death does not exist. They saw that there are no dead and that life goes on always, always, but under fresh forms. The fading rose sheds its pollen, which gives birth to other roses, and its scattered petals scent the air. The fruits come when the blossoms fall from the trees, and the dingy, hairy caterpillar turns into a brilliant butterfly. Nothing perishes, there are only changes. Beautiful birds circled all round Tyltal and Meitel. There were no blue ones among them, but the two children were so glad of their discovery that they asked for nothing more. Astonished and delighted, they kept on repeating, "There are no dead. There are no dead." Chapter 8. The Forest. As soon as Tyltal and Meitel were in bed, light kissed them and faded away at once, so as not to disturb their sleep with the rays that always streamed from her beautiful self. It must have been about midnight, when Tyltal, who was dreaming of the little blue children, felt a soft velvet paw pass to and fro over his face. He was surprised and sat up in bed in a bit of a fright, but he was soon reassured when he saw his friend Tylet's glowing eyes glittering in the dark. "Hush!" said the cat in his ear. "Hush! Don't wake anybody. If we can arrange to slip out without being seen, we shall catch the blue bird tonight. I have risked my life, oh my dearest master, in preparing a plan which will certainly lead us to victory." "But," said the boy kissing Tylet, "Light would be so glad to help us, and besides I should be ashamed to disobey her." "If you tell her," said the cat, sharply, "all is lost, believe me. Do as I say, and the day is ours." As she spoke these words, she hastened to dress him and also Meitel, who had heard a noise and was asking to go with them. "You don't understand," groaned Tyltal. "You are too small, you don't know what a wicked thing we are doing." But the treacherous cat answered all his arguments, saying that the reason why he had not found the blue bird so far was just the fault of Light, who always brought brightness with her. Let the children only go hunting by themselves, in the dark, and they would soon find all the blue birds that make men's happiness. The traitress displayed such cleverness that, before long, Tyltal's disobedience became a very fine thing in his own eyes. Each of Tylet's words provided a good excuse for his action or adorned it with a generous thought. He was too weak to set his will against trickery, allowed himself to be persuaded and walked out of the temple with a firm and cheerful step. Poor little fellow, if he could only have foreseen the terrible trap that awaited him. Our three companions set out across the fields in the white light of the moon. The cat seemed greatly excited, did nothing but talk and went so fast that the children were hardly able to keep up with her. "This time," she declared, "we shall have the blue bird, I am sure of it. I asked all the trees in the very oldest forest, they know him, because he hides among them. Then, in order to have everybody there, I sent the rabbit to beat the assembly and call the principal animals in the country. They reached the edge of the dark forest in an hour's time. Then, at a turn in the road, they saw, in the distance, someone who seemed to be hurrying towards them. Tylet arched her back, she felt that it was her old-time enemy. She quivered with rage. Was he once more going to thwart her plans? Had he guessed her secret? Was he coming, at the last moment, to save the children's lives? She leaned over to Tyltal and whispered to him, in her most honeyed voice, "I am sorry to say it is our worthy friend the dog. It is 1,000 pities, because his presence will make us fail in our object. He is on the worst of terms with everybody, even the trees. Do tell him to go back." "Go away, you ugly thing," said Tyltal, shaking his fist at the dog. "Dear old faithful Tylo, who had come because he suspected the cat's plans, was much hurt by these hard words. He was ready to cry, was still out of breath from running and could think of nothing to say. "Go away, I tell you," said Tyltyl again. "We don't want you here and there's an end of it. You're a nuisance, there." The dog was an obedient animal and, at any other time, he would have gone, but his affection told him what a serious business it was and he stood stock still. "Do you allow this disobedience?" said the cat to Tyltyl, in a whisper. "Hit him with your stick." Tyltyl beat the dog, as the cat suggested. "There, that will teach you to be more obedient," he said. The poor dog howled at receiving the blows, but there was no limit to his self-sacrifice. He went up to his young master pluckily and, taking him in his arms, cried, "I must kiss you now you've beaten me." Tyltyl, who was a good-hearted little fellow, did not know what to do, and the cat swore between her teeth like a wild beast. Fortunately, dear little Mydle interfered on our friend's behalf. No, I want him to stay," she pleaded. "I'm frightened when Tyla's not with us." Time was short and they had to come to a decision. "I'll find some other way to get rid of the idiot," thought the cat. And, turning to the dog, she said, in her most gracious manner, "We shall be so pleased if you will join us." As they entered the great forest, the children stuck close together, with the cat and the dog on either side of them. They were awed by the silence and the darkness and they felt much relieved when the cat exclaimed, "Here we are. Turn the diamond." Then the light spread around them and showed them a wonderful sight. They were standing in the middle of a large round space in the heart of the forest, where all the old trees seemed to reach up to the sky. Wide avenues formed a white star amidst the dark green of the wood. Everything was peaceful and still, but suddenly a strange shiver ran through the foliage, the branches moved and stretched like human arms, the roots raised the earth that covered them, came together, took the shapes of legs and feet and stood on the ground. A tremendous crash rang through the air, the trunks of the trees burst open and each of them let out its soul, which made its appearance like a funny human figure. Some stepped slowly from their trunks, others came out with a jump, and all of them gathered inquisitively round our friends. The talkative poplar began to chatter like a magpie. "Little men. We shall be able to talk to them. We have done with silence. Where do they come from? Who are they?" And so he rattled on. The lime tree, who was a jolly, fat fellow, came up calmly, smoking his pipe. The conceited and dandified chestnut tree screwed his glass into his eye to stare at the children. He wore a coat of green silk embroidered with pink and white flowers. He thought the little ones too poor looking and turned away in derision. "He thinks he's everybody, since he has taken to living in town. He despises us," sneered the poplar, who was jealous of him. Oh dear. Wept the willow, a wretched little stunted fellow, who came clattering along in a pair of wooden shoes too big for him. "They have come to cut off my head and arms for firewood." Tyltyl could not believe his eyes. He never stopped asking the cat questions. "Who's this? Who's that?" And Tylette introduced the soul of each tree to him. There was the elm, who was a sort of short-winded, paunchy, crabby gnome; the beech, an elegant, sprightly person; the birch, who looked like the ghost in the palace of night, with his white flowing garments and his restless gestures. The tallest figure was the fir tree. Tyltyl found it very difficult to see his face perched right at the top of his long, thin body, but he looked gentle and sad, whereas the cypress, who stood near him, dressed all in black, frightened Tyltyl terribly. However, so far nothing very dreadful had happened. The trees, delighted at being able to talk, were all chattering together, and our young friend was simply going to ask them where the blue bird was hidden, when, all of a sudden, silence reigned. The trees bowed respectfully and stood aside to make way for an immensely old tree, dressed in a long gown embroidered with moss and lichen. He leaned with one hand on a stick and with the other on a young oak sapling who acted as his guide, for the old oak was blind. His long white beard streamed in the wind. "It's the king," said Tyltyl to himself, when he saw his mistletoe crown. "I will ask him the secret of the forest." And he was just going up to him, when he stopped, seized with surprise and joy. There sat the blue bird before him, perched on the old oak's shoulder. "He has the blue bird," cried the boy gleefully. Quick! Give him to me." "Silence! Hold your tongue," said the greatly shocked trees. "Take off your hat, Tyltyl," said the cat. "It's the oak." The poor child at once obeyed with a smile. He did not understand the danger that threatened him and he did not hesitate to answer, "Yes, sir," when the oak asked him if he was still the woodcutter's son. Then the oak, trembling with rage, began to lay a terrible charge against Daddytyl. "In my family alone," he said, Your father has put to death 600 of my sons, 475 uncles and aunts, 1,200 cousins of both sexes, 380 daughters-in-law and 12,000 great-grandsons. No doubt his anger made him exaggerate a little, but Tyltle listened without protest and said, very politely, I beg your pardon, sir, for disturbing you. The cat said that you would tell us where the bluebird is. The oak was too old not to know all there was to know about men and animals. He smiled in his beard when he guessed the trap laid by the cat, and he felt very glad at it, for he had long wished to revenge the whole forest for the slavery to which man had subjected it. It's for the fairy Barrowloon's little girl, who is very ill, the boy continued. Enough, said the oak, silencing him. I do not hear the animals. Where are they? All this concerns them as much as us. We, the trees, must not assume the responsibility alone for the grave measures that have become necessary. Here they come, said the fir tree, looking over the top of the other trees. They are following the rabbit. I can see the souls of the horse, the bull, the ox, the cow, the wolf, the sheep, the pig, the goat, and the bear. All the animals now arrived. They walked on their hind legs and were dressed like human beings. They solemnly took up their positions in a circle among the trees, all except the frivolous goat, who began to skip down the avenues, and the pig, who hoped to find some glorious truffles among the roots that had newly left the ground. Are all here present? Asked the oak. The hen could not leave her eggs, said the rabbit. The hare was out for a run, the stag has pains in his horns and his corns, the fox is ill, here is the doctor's certificate, the goose did not understand and the turkey flew into a passion. Look, whispered Tyltle to Mydle. Aren't they funny? They are just like the rich children's fine toys in the windows at Christmas time. The rabbit especially made them laugh, with his cocked hat over his big ears, his blue, embroidered coat and his drum slung in front of him. Meanwhile, the oak was explaining the situation to his brothers the trees and to the animals. Treacherous Tylette had been quite right in reckoning on their hatred. The child you see before you, said the oak, thanks to a talisman stolen from the powers of earth, is able to take possession of our bluebird and thus to snatch from us the secret which we have kept since the origin of life. Now we know enough of man to entertain no doubt as to the fate which he reserves for us, once he is in possession of this secret. Any hesitation would be both foolish and criminal. It is a serious moment, the child must be done away with before it is too late. What is he saying? Asked Tyltle, who could not make out what the old tree was driving at. The dog was prowling round the oak and now showed his fangs. Do you see my teeth, you old cripple? He growled. He is insulting the oak, said the beech indignantly. Drive him out, shouted the oak, angrily. He's a traitor. What did I tell you? Whispered the cat to Tyltle. I will arrange things. But send him away. Will you be off? Said Tyltle to the dog. Do let me worry the gouty old beggar's moss slippers, begged Tylo. Tyltle tried in vain to prevent him. The rage of Tylo, who understood the danger, knew no bounds, and he would have succeeded in saving his master, if the cat had not thought of calling in the ivy, who till then had kept his distance. The dog pranced about like a madman, abusing everybody. He railed at the ivy. Come on, if you dare, you old ball of twine, you. The onlookers growled, the oak was pale with fury at seeing his authority denied, the trees and the animals were indignant, but, as they were cowards, not one of them dared protest, and the dog would have settled all of them, if he had gone on with his rebellion. But Tyltle threatened him harshly, and, suddenly yielding to his docile instincts, Tylo lay down at his master's feet. Thus it is that our finest virtues are treated as faults, when we exercise them without discrimination. From that moment, the children were lost. The ivy gagged and bound the poor dog, who was then taken behind the chestnut tree and tied to his biggest root. Now, cried the oak, in a voice of thunder, we can take counsel quietly. This is the first time that it is given us to judge man. I do not think that, after the monstrous injustice which we have suffered, there can remain the least doubt as to the sentence that awaits him. One cry rang from every throat. Death! 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 The poor children did not at first understand their doom, for the trees and animals, who were more accustomed to talking their own special language, did not speak very distinctly, and, besides, the innocent children could never imagine such cruelty. What is the matter with them? Asked the boy. Are they displeased? Don't be alarmed, said the cat. They are a little annoyed because spring is late. And she went on talking into Tyltle's ear, to divert his attention from what was happening. While the trusting lad was listening to her fibs, the others were discussing which form of execution would be the most practical and the least dangerous. The bull suggested a good butt with the horns, the beech offered his highest branch to hang the little children on, and the ivy was already preparing a slipknot. The fir tree was willing to give the 4 planks for the coffin and the cypress the perpetual grant of a tomb. By far the simplest way, whispered the willow, would be to drown them in one of my rivers. And the pig grunted between his teeth. In my opinion, the great thing would be to eat the little girl. She ought to be very tender. Silence! Roared the oak. What we have to decide is which of us shall have the honor of striking the first blow. That honor falls to you, our king, said the fir tree. Alas, I am too old, replied the oak. I am blind and infirm. To you, my evergreen brother, be the glory, in my place, of striking the decisive blow that shall set us free. But the fir tree declined the honor on the pretext that he was all ready to have the pleasure of burying the 2 victims and that he was afraid of rousing jealousy. He suggested the beech, as owning the best club. It is out of the question, said the beech. You know I am worm-eaten. Asked the elm and the cypress. Thereupon the elm began to moan and groan. A mole had twisted his great toe the night before and he could hardly stand upright, and the cypress excused himself and so did the poplar, who declared that he was ill and shivering with fever. Then the oak's indignation flared up. You are afraid of man, he exclaimed. Even those unprotected and unarmed little children inspire you with terror. Well, I shall go forth alone, old and shaky and blind as I am, against the hereditary enemy. Where is he? And groping his way with his stick, he moved towards Toddle, growling as he went. Our poor little friend had been very much afraid during the last few minutes. The cat had left him suddenly, saying that she wanted to smooth down the excitement, and had not come back. Myrtle nestled trembling against him, and he felt very lonely, very unhappy among those dreadful people whose anger he was beginning to notice. When he saw the oak marching on him with a threatening air, he drew his pocket knife and defied him like a man. Is it I he's after, that old one, with his big stick? He cried. But, at the sight of the knife, man's irresistible weapon, all the trees shook with fright and rushed at the oak to hold him back. There was a struggle, and the old king, conquered by the weight of years, threw away his stick. Shame on us! He shouted. Shame on us! Let the animals deliver us. The animals were only waiting for this. All wanted to be revenged together. Fortunately, their very eagerness caused a scrimmage which delayed the murder of the dear little ones. Myrtle uttered piercing screams. Don't be afraid, said Toddle, doing his best to protect her. I have my knife. The little chap means to die game, said the cock. That's the one I shall eat first, said the pig, eyeing Myrtle greedily. What have I done to all of you? Asked Toddle. Nothing at all, my little man, said the sheep. Eaten my little brother, my 2 sisters, my 3 uncles, my aunt, my grandpapa and my grandmama. Wait, when you're down, you shall see that I have teeth also. And so the sheep and the horse, who were the greatest cowards, waited for the little fellow to be knocked down before they dared take their share in the spoil. While they were talking, the wolf and the bear treacherously attacked Toddle from behind and pushed him over. It was an awful moment. All the animals, seeing him on the ground, tried to get at him. The boy raised himself to one knee and brandished his knife. Myrtle uttered yells of distress, and, to crown all, it suddenly became dark. Toddle called wildly for assistance. Help! Help! Tylo! Tylo! To the rescue! Where is Tylet? Come! Come! The cat's voice was heard in the distance, where she was craftily keeping out of sight. I can't come, she whined. I'm wounded. All this time, plucky little Toddle was defending himself as best he could, but he was alone against all of them, felt that he was going to be killed and, in a faltering voice, cried once more. Help! Tylo! Tylo! I can't hold out. There are too many of them. The bear. The pig. The wolf. The fir tree. The beech. Tylo! 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 Then the dog came leaping along, dragging his broken bonds and elbowing his way through the trees and animals and flung himself before his master, whom he defended furiously. Here, my little god. Don't be afraid. Have at them. I know how to use my teeth. All the trees and animals raised a loud outcry. Renegade. Idiot. Traitor. Felon. Simpleton. Sneak. Leave him. He's a dead man. Come over to us. The dog fought on. Never. Never. I alone against all of you. Never. Never. True to the gods, to the best, to the greatest. Take care, my little master, here's the bear. Look out for the bull. Tyltyl vainly tried to defend himself. "I'm done for, Tylo. It was a blow from the elm. My hand's bleeding." And he dropped to the ground. "No, I can hold out no longer." "They are coming," said the dog. "I hear somebody. We are saved. It is Light. Saved. Saved. See, they're afraid, they're retreating. Saved, my little king." And, sure enough, Light was coming towards them, and with her the dawn rose over the forest, which became light as day. "What is it? What has happened?" she asked, quite alarmed at the sight of the little ones and their dear Tylo covered with wounds and bruises. "Why, my poor boy, didn't you know? Turn the diamond quickly." Tyltyl hastened to obey, and immediately the souls of all the trees rushed back into their trunks, which closed upon them. The souls of the animals also disappeared, and there was nothing to be seen but a cow and a sheep browsing peacefully in the distance. The forest became harmless once more, and Tyltyl looked around him in amazement. "No matter," he said, "but for the dog, and if I hadn't had my knife." Light thought that he had been punished enough and did not scold him. Besides, she was very much upset by the horrible danger which he had run. Tyltyl, Mytyl and the dog, glad to meet again safe and sound, exchanged wild kisses. They laughingly counted their wounds, which were not very serious. Tylette was the only one to make a fuss. "The dog's broken my paw," she mewed. Tylo felt as if he could have made a mouthful of her. "Never mind," he said. "It'll keep." "Leave her alone, will you, you ugly beast?" said Mytyl. Our friends went back to the Temple of Light to rest after their adventure. Tyltyl, repenting of his disobedience, dared not even mention the blue bird of which he had caught a glimpse, and Light said to the children, gently, "Let this teach you, dears, that man is all alone against all in this world. Never forget that." A regular waterfall of tears came gushing from her eyes, flooding all around her. Chapter 9. The Leave-Taking. Weeks and months had passed since the children's departure on their journey, and the hour of separation was at hand. Light had been very sad lately. She had counted the days in sorrow, without a word to the animals and things, who had no idea of the misfortune that threatened them. On the day when we see them for the last time, they were all out in the gardens of the temple. Light stood watching them from a marble terrace, with Tyltyl and Mytyl sleeping by her side. Much had happened in the past 12 months, but the life of the animals and things, which had no intelligence to guide it, had made no progress. On the contrary. Bread had eaten so much that he was now not able to walk. Milk, devoted as ever, dragged him along in a bath chair. Fire's nasty temper had made him quarrel with everybody, and he had become very lonely and unhappy in consequence. Water, who had no will of her own, had ended by yielding to Sugar's sweet entreaties. They were now married, and Sugar presented a most piteous sight. The poor fellow was reduced to a shadow of his former self, shrank visibly day by day and was sillier than ever, while Water, in marrying, had lost her principal charm, her simplicity. The cat had remained the liar that she always was, and our dear friend Tylo had never been able to overcome his hatred for her. Poor things! Thought Light, with a sigh. They have not gained much by receiving the benefit of life. They have traveled and seen nothing of all the wonders that surrounded them in my peaceful temple. They were either quarreling with one another or overeating themselves until they fell ill. They were too foolish to enjoy their happiness, and they will recognize it for the first time presently, when they are about to lose it. At that moment, a pretty dove, with silver wings, alighted on her knees. It wore an emerald collar round its neck, with a note fastened to the clasp. The dove was the fairy Barraloon's messenger. Light opened the letter and read these few words. "Remember that the year is over." Then Light stood up, waved her wand, and everything disappeared from sight. A few seconds later, the whole company were gathered together outside a high wall with a small door in it. The first rays of the dawn were gilding the treetops. Tyltyl and Mytyl, whom Light was fondly supporting with her arms, woke up, rubbed their eyes and looked around them in astonishment. "What?" said Light to Tyltyl. "Don't you know that wall and that little door?" The sleepy boy shook his head. He remembered nothing. Then Light assisted his memory. "The wall," she said, "surrounds a house which we left one evening just a year ago today." "Just a year ago? Why, then?" And, clapping his hands with glee, Tyltyl ran to the door. "We must be near Mummy. I want to kiss her at once, at once, at once." But Light stopped him. It was too early, she said. Mummy and Daddy were still asleep and he must not wake them with a start. "Besides," she added, "the door will not open till the hour strikes." "What hour?" asked the boy. "The hour of separation," Light answered, sadly. "What?" said Tyltyl, in great distress. "Are you leaving us?" "I must," said Light. "The year is past. The fairy will come back and ask you for the bluebird." "But I haven't got the bluebird," cried Tyltyl. "The one of the land of memory turned quite black, the one of the future flew away, the nights are dead, those in the graveyard were not blue, and I could not catch the one in the forest. Will the fairy be angry? What will she say?" "Never mind, dear," said Light. "You did your best. And, though you did not find the bluebird, you deserve to do so, for the goodwill, pluck and courage which you showed." Light's face beamed with happiness as she spoke these words, for she knew that to deserve to find the bluebird was very much the same thing as finding it, but she was not allowed to say this, for it was a beautiful mystery, which Tyltyl had to solve for himself. She turned to the animals and things, who stood weeping in a corner, and told them to come and kiss the children. Bread at once put down the cage at Tyltyl's feet and began to make a speech. "In the name of all, I crave permission." "You shan't have mine," cried Fire. "Order," cried Water. "We still have tongues of our own," roared Fire. "Yes, yes," screamed Sugar, who, knowing that his end was at hand, kept kissing Water and melting before the others' eyes. Poor Bread in vain tried to make his voice heard above the din. Light had to interfere and command silence. Then Bread spoke his last words. "I am leaving you," he said, between his sobs. "I am leaving you, my dear children, and you will no longer see me in my living form. Your eyes are about to close to the invisible life of things, but I shall be always there, in the bread pan, on the shelf, on the table, beside the soup, I who am, if I may say so, the most faithful companion, the oldest friend of man." "Well, and what about me?" shouted Fire, angrily. "Silence," said Light. "The hour is passing. Be quick and say goodbye to the children." Fire rushed forward, took hold of the children, one after the other, and kissed them so violently that they screamed with pain. "Oh! Oh! He's burning me! Oh! Oh! He's scorched my nose!" "Let me kiss the place and make it well," said Water, going up to the children gently. This gave Fire his chance. "Take care," he said, "you'll get wet." "I am loving and gentle," said Water. "I am kind to human beings." "What about those you drown?" asked Fire. But Water pretended not to hear. "Love the wells, listen to the brooks," she said. "I shall always be there. When you sit down in the evening, beside the springs, try to understand what they are trying to say." Then she had to break off, for a regular waterfall of tears came gushing from her eyes, flooding all around her. However, she resumed. "Think of me when you see the water bottle. You will find me also in the ewer, the watering can, the cistern and the tap." Then Sugar came up, with a limping walk, for he could hardly stand on his feet. He uttered a few words of sorrow, in an affected voice, and then stopped, for tears, he said, were not in harmony with his temperament. "Humbug!" cried Bread. "Sugarplum! Lollipop! Caramel!" yelped Fire. Closely pursued by the dog, who overwhelmed her with bites, blows and kicks. And all began to laugh, except the two children, who were very sad. "Where are Tylette and Tylo gone to?" asked our hero. At that moment, the cat came running up, in a terrible state. Her hair was on end and disheveled, her clothes were torn, and she was holding a handkerchief to her cheek, as though she had the toothache. She uttered terrible groans and was closely pursued by the dog, who overwhelmed her with bites, blows and kicks. The others rushed in between them to separate them, but the two enemies continued to insult and glare at each other. The cat accused the dog of pulling her tail and putting tin tacks in her food and beating her. The dog simply growled and denied none of his actions. "You've had some," he kept saying, "you've had some and you're going to have some more." But, suddenly, he stopped and, as he was panting with excitement, it could be seen that his tongue turned quite white. Light had told him to kiss the children for the last time. "For the last time?" stammered poor Tylo. "Are we to part from these poor children?" His grief was such that he was incapable of understanding anything. "Yes," said Light. "The hour which you know of is at hand. We are going to return to silence." Thereupon the dog, suddenly realizing his misfortune, began to utter real howls of despair and fling himself upon the children, whom he loaded with mad and violent caresses. "No. No," he cried. "I refuse. I refuse. I shall always talk. And I shall be very good. You will keep me with you and I shall learn to read and write and play dominoes. And I shall always be very clean. And I shall never steal anything in the kitchen again." He went on his knees before the two children, sobbing and entreating, and, when Tylo, with his eyes full of tears, remained silent, dear Tylo had a last magnificent idea. Running up to the cat, he offered, with smiles that looked like grins, to kiss her. Tylet, who did not possess his spirit of self-sacrifice, leapt back and took refuge by Meitl's side. Then Meitel said, innocently, "You, Tylet, are the only one that hasn't kissed us yet." The cat put on a mincing tone. "Children," said she, "I love you both as much as you deserve." There was a pause. "And now," said Light, "let me, in my turn, give you a last kiss." As she spoke, she spread her veil round them as if she would have wrapped them for the last time in her luminous might. Then she gave them each a long and loving kiss. Tyltyl and Meitel hung on to her beseechingly. "No, no, no, Light," they cried. "Stay here with us. Daddy won't mind. We will tell Mummy how kind you have been." "Where will you go all alone?" "Not very far, my children," said Light. "Over there to the land of the silence of things." "No, no," said Tyltyl. "I won't have you go." But Light quieted them with a motherly gesture and said words to them which they never forgot. Long after, when they were a grandfather and grandmother in their turn, Tyltyl and Meitel still remembered them and used to repeat them to their grandchildren. Here are Light's touching words. "Listen, Tyltyl. Do not forget, child, that everything that you see in this world has neither beginning nor end. If you keep this thought in your heart and let it grow up with you, you will always, in all circumstances, know what to say, what to do and what to hope for." And, when our two friends began to sob, she added, lovingly, "Do not cry, my dear little ones. I have not a voice like water, I have only my brightness, which man does not understand. But I watch over him to the end of his days. Never forget that I am speaking to you in every spreading moonbeam, in every twinkling star, in every dawn that rises, in every lamp that is lit, in every good and bright thought of your soul." At that moment, the grandfather's clock in the cottage struck 8 o'clock. Light stopped for a moment and then, in a voice that grew suddenly fainter, whispered, "Goodbye. Goodbye. The hour is striking. Goodbye." Her veil faded away, her smile became paler, her eyes closed, her form vanished and, through their tears, the children saw nothing but a thin ray of light dying away at their feet. Then they turned to the others, but these had disappeared. Chapter 10. The Awakening. The grandfather's clock in the woodcutter's cottage had struck 8, and his two little children, Tyltyl and Meitel, were still asleep in their little beds. Mummytel stood looking at them, with her arms akimbo and her apron tucked up, laughing and scolding in the same breath. "I can't let them go on sleeping till midday," she said. "Come, get up, you little lazybones." But it was no use shaking them, kissing them or pulling the bedclothes off them. They kept on falling back upon their pillows, with their noses pointing at the ceiling, their mouths wide open, their eyes shut and their cheeks all pink. At last, after receiving a gentle thump in the ribs, Tyltyl opened one eye and murmured, "What? Light? Where are you?" "No, no, don't go away." "Light!" cried Mummytel, laughing. "Why, of course, it's Light. Has been for ever so long. What's the matter with you? You look quite blinded." "Mummy. Mummy," said Tyltyl, rubbing his eyes. "It's you." "Why, of course, it's I. Why do you stare at me in that way? Is my nose turned upside down, by any chance?" Tyltyl was quite awake by this time and did not trouble to answer the question. He was beside himself with delight. It was ages and ages since he had seen his mummy and he never tired of kissing her. Mummytel began to be uneasy. What could the matter be? Had her boy lost his senses? Here he was suddenly talking of a long journey in the company of the fairy and water and milk and sugar and fire and bread and light. He made believe that he had been away a year. "But you haven't left the room," cried Mummytel, who was now nearly beside herself with fright. "I put you to bed last night and here you are this morning. It's Christmas Day, don't you hear the bells in the village?" "Of course, it's Christmas Day," said Tyltyl, obstinately, "seeing that I went away a year ago, on Christmas Eve. You're not angry with me? Did you feel very sad? And what did Daddy say?" "Come, we're still asleep," said Mummytel, trying to take comfort. "You've been dreaming. Get up and put on your breeches and your little jacket." "Hello, I've got my shirt on," said Tyltyl. And, leaping up, he knelt down on the bed and began to dress, while his mother kept on looking at him with a scared face. The little boy rattled on. "Ask Meitel, if you don't believe me. Oh, we have had such adventures. We saw Grandad and Granny, yes, in the land of memory, it was on our way. They are dead, but they are quite well, aren't they, Meitel? And Meitel, who was now beginning to wake up, joined her brother in describing their visit to the grandparents and the fun which they had had with their little brothers and sisters. This was too much for Mummitel. She ran to the door of the cottage and called with all her might to her husband, who was working on the edge of the forest. Oh dear, she cried. I shall lose them as I lost the others. Do come. Come quick. Daddy-dill soon entered the cottage. With his axe in his hand, he listened to his wife's lamentations, while the two children told the story of their adventures over again and asked him what he had done during the year. You see, said Mummitel, crying. They have lost their heads, something will happen to them, run and fetch the doctor. But the woodcutter was not the man to put himself out for such a trifle. He kissed the little ones, calmly lit his pipe and declared that they looked very well and that there was no hurry. At that moment, there came a knock at the door and the neighbor walked in. She was a little old woman leaning on a stick and very much like the fairy Barraloon. The children at once flung their arms around her neck and capered round her, shouting merrily. It's the fairy Barraloon. The neighbor, who was a little hard of hearing, paid no attention to their cries and said to Mummitel, I have come to ask for a bit of fire for my Christmas stew. It's very chilly this morning. Good morning, children. Meanwhile, Tottle had become a little thoughtful. No doubt, he was glad to see the old fairy again, but what would she say when she heard that he had not the bluebird? He made up his mind like a man and went up to her boldly. Fairy Barraloon, I could not find the bluebird. What is he saying? Asked the neighbor, quite taken aback. Thereupon Mummitel began to fret again. Come, Tottle, don't you know Goody Berlingot? Why, yes, of course, said Tottle, looking the neighbor up and down. It's the fairy Barraloon. Very, what? Asked the neighbor. Barraloon, answered Tottle, calmly. Berlingot, said the neighbor. You mean Berlingot? Tottle was a little put out by her positive way of talking, and he answered. Barraloon or Berlingot, as you please, ma'am, but I know what I'm saying. Daddy-dill was beginning to have enough of it. We must put a stop to this, he said. I will give them a smack or two. Don't, said the neighbor, it's not worthwhile. It's only a little fit of dreaming, they must have been sleeping in the moonbeams. My little girl, who is very ill, is often like that. Mummitel put aside her own anxiety for a moment and asked after the health of neighbor Berlingot's little girl. She's only so-so, said the neighbor, shaking her head. She can't get up. The doctor says it's her nerves. I know what would cure her, for all that. She was asking me for it only this morning, for her Christmas present. She hesitated a little, looked at Tottle with a sigh and added, in a disheartened tone. What can I do? It's a fancy she has. The others looked at one another in silence, they knew what the neighbor's words meant. Her little girl had long been saying that she would get well if Tottle would only give her his dove, but he was so fond of it that he refused to part with it. Well, said Mummitel to her son, won't you give your bird to that poor little thing? She has been dying to have it for ever so long. My bird! Cried Tottle, slapping his forehead as though they had spoken of something quite out of the way. My bird! He repeated. That's true, I was forgetting about him. And the cage? Meitel, do you see the cage? It's the one which Bread carried. Yes, it's the same one, there it is. It's the blue bird we were looking for. We have been miles and miles and miles. And he was here all the time. Tottle would not believe his eyes. He took a chair, put it under the cage and climbed onto it gaily, saying, Of course, I'll give him to her, of course, I will. Then he stopped, in amazement. Why, he's blue, he said. It's my dove, just the same, but he has turned blue while I was away. And our hero jumped down from the chair and began to skip for joy, crying. It's the blue bird we were looking for. We have been miles and miles and miles and he was here all the time. He was here, at home. Oh, but how wonderful. Meitel, do you see the bird? What would Light say? There, Madame Berlingot, take him quickly to your little girl. While he was talking, Mummitel threw herself into her husband's arms and moaned. You see? He's taken bad again. He's wandering. Meantime, neighbor Berlingot beamed all over her face, clasped her hands together and mumbled her thanks. When Tottle gave her the bird, she could hardly believe her eyes. She hugged the boy in her arms and wept with joy and gratitude. Do you give it me? She kept saying. Do you give it me like that, straight away and for nothing? Goodness, how happy she will be. I fly. I will come back to tell you what she says. Yes, yes, go quickly, said Tyltyl, for some of them changed their color. Neighbor Berlingot ran out and Tyltyl shut the door after her. Then he turned round on the threshold, looked at the walls of the cottage, looked all around him and seemed wonderstruck. Daddy, Mummy, what have you done to the house? He asked. It's just as it was, but it's much prettier. His parents looked at each other in bewilderment, and the little boy went on. Why, yes, everything has been painted and made to look like new, everything is clean and polished. And look at the forest outside the window. How big and fine it is. One would think it was quite new. How happy I feel here, oh, how happy I feel. The worthy woodcutter and his wife could not make out what was coming over their son, but you, my dear little readers, who have followed Tyltyl and Mytyl through their beautiful dream, will have guessed what it was that altered everything in our young hero's view. It was not for nothing that the fairy, in his dream, had given him a talisman to open his eyes. He had learned to see the beauty of things around him, he had passed through trials that had developed his courage, while pursuing the blue bird, the bird of happiness that was to bring happiness to the fairy's little girl. He had become open-handed and so good-natured that the mere thought of giving pleasure to others filled his heart with joy. And, while traveling through endless, wonderful, imaginary regions, his mind had opened out to life. The boy was right, when he thought everything more beautiful, for, to his richer and purer understanding, everything must needs seem infinitely fairer than before. Meanwhile, Tyltyl continued his joyful inspection of the cottage. He leaned over the bread pan to speak a kind word to the loaves, he rushed at Tylo, who was sleeping in his basket, and congratulated him on the good fight which he had made in the forest. Mytyl stooped down to stroke Tylet, who was snoozing by the stove, and said, Well, Tylet? You know me, I see, but you have stopped talking. Then Tyltyl put his hand up to his forehead. Hello, he cried. The diamond's gone. Who's taken my little green hat? Never mind, I don't want it any more. Ah, there's fire. Good morning, sir. He'll be crackling to make water angry. He ran to the tap, turned it on and bent down over the water. Good morning, water, good morning. What did she say? She still talks, but I don't understand her as well as I did. Oh, how happy I am, how happy I am. So am I, cried Mytyl. And our two young friends took each other's hands and began to scamper round the kitchen. Mummytyl felt a little relieved at seeing them so full of life and spirits. Besides, Daddytyl was so calm and placid. He sat eating his porridge and laughing. You see, they are playing at being happy, he said. Of course, the poor dear man did not know that a wonderful dream had taught his little children not to play at being happy, but to be happy, which is the greatest and most difficult of lessons. I like light best of all, said Tyltyl to Mytyl, standing on tiptoe by the window. You can see her over there, through the trees of the forest. Tonight, she will be in the lamp. Dear, oh, dear, how lovely it all is and how glad I feel, how glad I. He stopped and listened. Everybody lent an ear. They heard laughter and merry voices, and the sounds came nearer. It's her voice, cried Tyltyl. Let me open the door. As a matter of fact, it was the little girl with her mother, neighbor Berlingot. Look at her, said Goody Berlingot, quite overcome with joy. She can run, she can dance, she can fly. It's a miracle. When she saw the bird, she jumped, just like that. And Goody Berlingot hopped from one leg to the other at the risk of falling and breaking her long, hooked nose. The children clapped their hands and everybody laughed. The little girl was there, in her long white nightdress, standing in the middle of the kitchen, a little surprised to find herself on her feet after so many months' illness. She smiled and pressed Tyltyl's dove to her heart. Tyltyl looked first at the child and then at Mytyl. Don't you think she's very like Light? He asked. She is much smaller, said Mytyl. Yes, indeed, said Tyltyl. But she will grow. And the three children tried to put a little food down the bird's beak, while the parents began to feel easier in their minds and looked at them and smiled. Tyltyl was radiant. I will not conceal from you, my dear little readers, that the dove had hardly changed color at all and that it was joy and happiness that decked him with the magnificent bright blue plumage in our hero's eyes. No matter. Tyltyl, without knowing it, had discovered Light's great secret, which is that we draw nearer to happiness by trying to give it to others. But now something happened. Everybody became excited, the children screamed, the parents threw up their arms and rushed to the open door. The bird had suddenly escaped. He was flying away as fast as he could. My bird! My bird! Sobbed the little girl. But Tyltyl was the first to run to the staircase and he returned in triumph. It's all right, he said. Don't cry. He is still in the house and we shall find him again. And he gave a kiss to the little girl, who was already smiling through her tears. You'll be sure to catch him again, won't you? She asked. Trust me, replied our friend, confidentially. I now know where he is. You also, my dear little readers, now know where the blue bird is. Dear Light revealed nothing to the woodcutter's children, but she showed them the road to happiness by teaching them to be good and kind and generous. Suppose that, at the beginning of this story, she had said to them, Go straight back home. The blue bird is there, in the humble cottage, in the wicker cage, with your dear father and mother who love you. The children would never have believed her. What? Tyltal would have answered. The blue bird, my dove? Nonsense, my dove is gray. Happiness, in the cottage. With daddy and mummy? Oh, I say. There are no toys at home and it's awfully boring there. We want to go ever so far and meet with tremendous adventures and have all sorts of fun. That is what he would have said, and he and Mydal would have set out in spite of everything, without listening to Light's advice, for the most certain truths are good for nothing if we do not put them to the test ourselves. It only takes a moment to tell a child all the wisdom in the world, but our whole lives are not long enough to help us understand it, because our own experience is our only light. Each of us must seek out happiness for himself, and he has to take endless pains and undergo many a cruel disappointment before he learns to become happy by appreciating the simple and perfect pleasures that are always within easy reach of his mind and heart. The end.
英語聞き流しリスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語は、ホームページからお聞きいただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com